Welcome to the Underclass Podcast with Austin Picard. I'm an independent researcher who can't stomach being lied to on a daily basis by the mainstream media. While we live in a fracturing society, launched into parallel realities, falling perfectly onto the two sides of the political spectrum, I remain in the underclass. Throughout the course of my research into some of the most socially taboo subjects in recent memory, I've come to the realization that it's very difficult for the average person, equipped with only a baseline concept of principled morality and human character, to even imagine, let alone be convinced, that there are individuals in this world capable of such extraordinary evil. An entire population subconsciously projecting its moral values onto perfect strangers with some inherent expectation of the fulfilling of an unspoken social contract. The old phrase originated by 19th century British politician Lord Acton comes to mind. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in the vein of powerful corruption, we inject ourselves, only to find an immoral dystopian world with the masses unwittingly marching in lockstep, solely encouraging compliance in order to prop up a safe, singular, convenient narrative. As we bear witness to substantiated claims of high-level government officials with advanced knowledge of the attacks, government-sponsored investigations hindered from the outset to facilitate the cover-up, and glaring conflicts of interest exposed over time, it's become necessary, in honor of the victims and their families, to relaunch an independent and honest investigation into the real story behind what's widely considered the deadliest terrorist act in world history, September 11th, 2001. The Project for the New American Century, often referred to as PNAC, was a neoconservative think tank primarily focused on United States foreign policy and founded by Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan, officially established as a nonprofit educational organization in 1997. Robert Kagan's wife just so happens to be Victoria Nuland, who was in the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administration, most notably in 2014, serving as the Assistant U.S. Secretary of State and top diplomat for European affairs, where she fulfilled her role in facilitating yet another violent coup d'etat in the Russian border state of Ukraine. This time, the latest Western-backed coup came in the form of the Maidan Uprising, exposed by a leaked phone call with Jeffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine at the time.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay, good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting, and that Yats was going to offer in that context a three-way, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got, and he's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah,
okay.
I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
This covert regime change operation was now undressed and out in the open, proving the true intentions of the U.S. State Department to overthrow the democratically elected government of President Viktor Yanukovych, all while convincing the ever-gullible U.S. mainstream media that the coup wasn't really a coup, but a victory for democracy. She was forced to apologize publicly, but not for the clear violation of international law and underhanded tactics of regime change, but for using dirty words while referring to our European counterparts in the European Union. Victoria Nuland is currently the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, serving directly under the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken as members of the Biden administration. She is still a key controlling operator in America's foreign policy toward Ukraine. And to put it kindly, she has been noted for her strong criticism of Russian policies. And in a statement at a congressional hearing in early 2023 regarding the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, which caused the single largest methane gas leak in human history, Victoria Nuland made a statement saying, "I am, and I think the administration is, very gratified to know that the Nord Stream 2 is now a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea." Nuland's husband, Robert Kagan, is also a foreign policy commentator and senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and writes a monthly column on world affairs for the Washington Post. No conflict of interest there, right? He is a leading advocate of liberal interventionism and has often been a foreign policy advisor to U.S. presidential candidates, as well as Democratic administrations via the Foreign Affairs Policy Board. Through the work of the PNAC, Project for the New American Century, from 1998, Kagan was an early and strong advocate of military action in Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, as well as to remove Mr. Hussein and his regime from power. According to a report from the Carnegie Endowment, after the 1998 bombing of Iraq was announced, Kagan said, "Bombing Iraq isn't enough," and called on Clinton to send ground troops to Iraq. By January of 2002, Kagan and Bill Kristol falsely claimed in an article published by the Weekly Standard that Saddam Hussein was supporting the existence of a terrorist training camp in Iraq, complete with a Boeing 707 for practicing hijackings, and filled with non-Iraqi radical Muslims. Kagan and Kristol further alleged that the September 11th lead hijacker Mohammed Atta met with an Iraqi intelligence official several months before the attacks. All of these allegations were later proven to be entirely false. Who knew the architects of United States foreign policy are inherited by each new presidential administration despite their party affiliation? In 1996, less than a year before the foundation of PNAC, Kristol and Kagan co-authored an article in Foreign Affairs, which is an American magazine of international relations and U.S. foreign policy, published by, you guessed it, the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR, a non-profit, non-partisan membership organization and think tank specializing in U.S. foreign policy and international affairs. In the article, they argued that American conservatives were adrift in the area of foreign policy, advocated a more elevated vision of America's international role, and suggested that the United States should adopt a stance of benevolent global hegemony. By June 1997, Kristol and Kagan founded PNAC in order to advance the goals they had first laid out in Foreign Affairs, echoing the article's statements and goals in PNAC's founding statement of principles. Stuart Eldon, who most recently served as permanent representative of the United Kingdom to NATO, stated in 2009 that the influence that PNAC had was astonishing, noting that the number of figures associated with PNAC that had been members of the Reagan or the first Bush administration, and the number that would take up office with the administration of the second President Bush, demonstrate that it is not merely a question of employees and budgets. On June 3, 1997, PNAC released a statement of principles with 25 signatories, including project members and outside supporters, describing the United States as the world's preeminent power, and said that the nation faced a challenge to shape a new century favorable to American principles and interests. In order to achieve this goal, the statement's signers called for significant increases in defense spending and for the promotion of political and economic freedom abroad. It said the United States should strengthen ties with its democratic allies, challenge regimes hostile to our interests and values, and preserve and extend an international order friendly to our security, our prosperity, and our principles. Calling for a Reaganite policy of military strength and moral clarity, it concluded that PNAC's principles were necessary if the United States is to build on the successes of this past century and to ensure our security and our greatness in the next. By 1998, through articles published at the New York Times during the Iraq disarmament process, Kristol and Kagan were already advocating for regime change in Iraq. Following the lies and deliberate deception in regard to the false claims of Iraqi unwillingness to cooperate with UN weapons inspections, core members of the PNAC, serving as a who's who for the most influential figures in the past 50 years driving United States foreign policy, including Richard Perle, Paul Wolfowitz, James Woolsey, Elliot Abrams, Donald Rumsfeld, Robert Zoellick, and John Bolton were among the signatories of an open letter initiated by the PNAC to President Bill Clinton calling for the removal of Saddam Hussein. German journalist and author Jochen Bolscha worked as an editor for Der Spiegel a German weekly news magazine, and in March 2003, he wrote an article entitled "The War Designed in a Think Tank," where he specifically referred to PNAC when he claimed that ultra-right-wing U.S. think tanks had been drawing up plans for an era of American global domination for the emasculation of the UN and an aggressive war against Iraq in broad daylight since 1998. One of PNAC's most influential publications was a 90-page report titled "Rebuilding America's Defenses: Strategies, Forces, and Resources for a New Century." Citing the PNAC's 1997 Statement of Principles, Rebuilding America's Defenses asserted that the United States should seek to preserve and extend its position of global leadership by maintaining the preeminence of U.S. military forces. 6 of the participants who contributed papers or attended meetings related to the production of this report subsequently assumed key defense and foreign policy positions in the Bush administration. The aforementioned German journalist continued in his 2003 article, again published and found in Der Spiegel, making the claim that rebuilding America's defenses had actually been developed by PNAC for Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz, and Libby, and was devoted to matters of maintaining U.S. preeminence, thwarting rival powers, and shaping the global security system according to U.S. special interests. Rebuilding America's Defenses recommended establishing 4 core missions for U.S. military forces: the defense of the American homeland, the fighting and winning of multiple simultaneous major theater wars, the performance of constabular duties associated with shaping the security environment in key regions, and the transformation of U.S. forces to exploit the revolution in military affairs. However, the most controversial section of the report, entitled "Creating Tomorrow's Dominant Force," was written and made public in September of 2000, almost exactly a year before the September 11th attacks, and claimed in order to further the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor.
What the hell was that?
Sounded like a plane crash.
Somebody hit the World Trade Center or the...
It's a trade
Yes, the
center.
World Trade Center.
Yeah. This just in, you were
Matt just
looking
mentioned
at
we have a breaking
obviously
news
very
story to tell you
disturbing
about.
launch
I wanna
out
tell you
there.
what
That is
we
the
know
World
as
Trade
we
Center,
speak.
and we
We just
have
entered World
unconfirmed
Trade
reports
Center
this morning.
As we go now, we have serious news of a major, a very tragic event for you right now. An incredible plane crash into the World Trade Center.
Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. According to the official narrative, 19 Arab terrorists armed with box cutters hijacked 4 commercial airliners, overpowering the military combat-trained pilots as well as the passengers, before flying the planes wildly off course for over an hour without being intercepted or shot down in the most heavily defended airspace in the world. American Airlines Flight 11 was the first plane to hit, crashing into the North Tower of World Trade Center Building 1 at 8:46 a.m., and after burning for 1 hour and 41 minutes, WTC-1 would collapse at free fall speed into its own footprint within 10 seconds, following the path of most resistance. At 9:03 a.m., the South Tower, World Trade Center Building 2, was struck by the United Airlines Flight 175, and after burning for only 55 minutes, WTC-2 would also collapse at free fall speed into its own footprint, again within 10 seconds, following the path of most resistance. Often left unmentioned is World Trade Center Building 7, which remained standing for 6 hours until, as the story goes, office fires ignited all throughout the building, explained away by falling debris from the North Tower, causing Building 7 to collapse at free fall speed into its own footprint within 10 seconds, at 5:21 that same afternoon. The third plane, American Airlines Flight 77, 31 minutes into takeoff at 8:51 a.m., lead hijacker Hani Hanjour and 4 other Saudi nationals stormed the cockpit, forcing passengers and crew to the rear of the cabin, threatening the hostages, yet sparing all of them. Hanjour proceeded to take control of the large Boeing 757, despite having failed the flight evaluation in a much smaller Cessna 172 less than a month before 9/11, due to poor piloting skills noted by the flight instructor. James Corbett perfectly describes Hanjour's unbelievably extraordinary flight path in his brilliant 2011 5-minute rundown, found at CorbettReport.com, as a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon and the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before. Meanwhile, United Airlines Flight 93 was the fourth and final passenger jet hijacked that morning, and the only plane not to arrive at its presumed target, which was later stated to be the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The plane had initially been delayed for nearly an hour when it finally left the runway at 8:42 a.m., and 46 minutes into the flight, the hijackers stormed the cockpit and overpowered the pilots after murdering one of the passengers in the cabin. 29 minutes after the hijacking, at 9:57 a.m., the passengers retaliated in an attempt to take back control of the aircraft, lasting 6 minutes before the hijackers nosedived the plane into a field near a reclaimed strip mine in Stony Creek Township, Somerset County, Pennsylvania, around 20 minutes before it would have reached the National Capital Region. Out of the 19 hijackers, 15 were from Saudi Arabia, 2 were from the UAE, United Arab Emirates, 1 was from Egypt, and 1 was from Lebanon. Sunday, September 23, 2001, BBC News published an article with the title, "Hijacked Suspects Alive and Well," reporting that another of the men named by the FBI as a hijacker in the suicide attacks on Washington and New York has turned up alive and well. The identities of 4 of the 19 suspects accused of having carried out the attacks are now in doubt. Saudi Arabian pilot Walid al-Shari was one of 5 men that the FBI said had deliberately crashed American Airlines Flight 11 into the World Trade Center on September 11th. His photograph was released and has since appeared in newspapers and on television around the world, and now he is protesting his innocence from Casablanca, Morocco. He told journalists there that he had nothing to do with the attacks on New York and Washington and had been in Morocco when they happened. He has contacted both the Saudi and American authorities, according to Saudi press reports. He acknowledges that he attended flight training school at Daytona Beach in the United States and is indeed the same Walid al-Shari to whom the FBI has been referring. But he says he left the United States in September last year, became a pilot with Saudi Arabian Airlines, and is currently on a further training course in Morocco. The BBC continued their report, listing a total of 4 hijackers they claimed were alive and well in different parts of the world, even quoting the FBI director at the time, Robert Mueller, who publicly acknowledged that the identity of several of the known hijackers was in doubt. The story of the 19 hijackers had been termed the myth of the 19 Arab Oswalds, leading us to tug on an even more compelling thread I discovered, called the Visa Express program, that was run out of the Jeddah consulate in Saudi Arabia and helped at least 11 of the 19 alleged 9/11 hijackers to obtain their visas in order to gain entry into the United States. State Department whistleblower J. Michael Springman worked as an official in the visa section of the U.S. consulate in Jeddah throughout the 1980s, where he alleged that CIA officials were in fact overriding the consular services officials who were attempting to plausibly deny suspect visa applications. Springman claims that while he was stationed in Saudi Arabia, he was ordered by high-level State Department officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants. He testified that the American Consul General J. Freres bombarded him with demands, not requests, along with the political officer and his successor, to circumvent standard operative procedure in order to issue visas to many of the alleged 19 hijackers. Springman states that these applicants were terrorist recruits of CIA asset Osama bin Laden, who were being sent to the United States in order to obtain further training from the CIA.
All right, I'm Mike Springman. Some 15 years ago now, I was chief of the visa section at the CIA's consulate at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. In Jeddah?
Yeah.
People were being brought there from all over the Middle East for visas to come to the United States. And I was told they were terrorists that were recruited to come to the U.S. for training and shipped back to Afghanistan for fighting the Soviet soldiers. And this was, when I was there, this was between 1987 and 1989. And it wasn't until I got back to D.C. and talked to the journalist Joe Trento and a couple of other people. One was a guy connected with a local university here in D.C., and another fellow who was with another government agency. But I learned that, it wasn't visa fraud like I thought at the time. I thought somebody was being paid under the table for this, based on a conversation I had with a guy. And I thought that, this was really strange, but I couldn't explain it. And then when Trento and these other people started talking to me, and I said, well, this explains the whole thing. The reason why there was this pressure, the reason why these guys who were not businessmen, who were not educated, who were essentially low-level clerk-type people, supermarket checkers, guys who worked in an auto parts store, why visas were being demanded for them. And, when I put the pieces together from my three contacts, it was people who were brought here, who were recruited by the CIA and its asset, Osama bin Laden, to come to the United States for training as terrorists and to return them to Afghanistan to fight with the Soviet soldiers there and kill them.
Springman issued complaints to higher authorities at several agencies to no avail. In an interview with CBC, he explained, when he refused the visas because of the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act, and the State Department's own regulations clearly stated that a visa applicant is an intending immigrant unless and until he can prove otherwise, I was repeatedly overruled by the chief of the consular section, Justice Stevens. Sometimes in the face of very real and very vocal threats against me, I issued the visas with a notation on the application form as to why I had refused it and that I had reversed myself only upon direct order of the head of the consulate, J. Philip Freres. Things got so bad that on Freres' order, I wasn't allowed to issue any visas unless the CIA base chief had approved them. In one case, 2 Pakistanis apply for visas to attend a trade show in the U.S., but they are unable to name the trade show or city in which it will be held. When Springman denies them a visa, he gets an almost immediate call from a CIA case officer hidden in the commercial section of the consulate that I should reverse myself and grant these guys a visa. Springman refuses, but the decision is reversed by the chief of the consular section. Springman realizes that even the ambassador Walter Cutler is aware of the situation, which becomes more brazen and blatant as time goes on. On one occasion, Springman is even told, If you want a job in the State Department in the future, you will change your mind. I protested this state of affairs to Stevens, to Ferrers, to Stephanie Smith, counselor for consular affairs at the embassy in Riyadh, and on the advice of Smith to the Bureau of Consular Affairs at the State Department in Washington, D.C. I also questioned Jean Bradford, head of the consular section's other office, Citizen Services, about this. She told me that Jay Ferrers just liked giving candy to babies. I also discussed this with the part-time consular officer assigned to my section, who professed dislike of this practice. But then he frequently issued visas to his own contacts, often saying, "Mike, let me handle this next guy in line. He's one of mine." Upon my return to Washington, D.C. in 1991, I was fired, and the file I had maintained on the questionable visa candidates was shredded after my departure from Jeddah. Springman later learns that recruits from many countries fighting for bin Laden's Mujahideen against Russia and Afghanistan were funneled through the Jeddah office to get visas to come to the U.S., where the recruits would travel to train for the Afghan war. According to Springman, the Jeddah consulate was run by the CIA and staffed almost entirely by intelligence agents. He told CBC, "This operation in Jeddah was so peculiar, so strange, and it went against anything I had ever seen or heard in my 20 years in government, that I thought that what these people were telling me about CIA involvement with Osama and with Afghanistan had to be true because nothing else would fit. By the attempts to cover me up and shut me down, this convinced me more and more that this was not a pipe dream. This was not a machination. This was not conspiracy theory." Back at Ground Zero, we're introduced to an unlikely hero, a former janitor given the nickname Last Man Out, after heroically saving hundreds of lives using his master key to the North Tower of the World Trade Center on the morning of 9/11. William Rodriguez was reportedly in the basement level of World Trade Center 1 when American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the tower. He received several awards for heroism after helping evacuate many survivors, and according to journalist Tony Collins, he bravely led firefighters up the stairs, unlocking doors as they climbed and helping hundreds of survivors. Another publication added, he then went back into the building in a bid to rescue his friends at the top of the tower on the 106th floor. But he kept finding others who needed his help as well.
William Rodriguez was working as a janitor at the World Trade Center when the towers were attacked. Using a master key, he ran to open as many doors as he could before exiting and becoming buried alive.
So they started looking under the rubble, and once I got pulled from under the rubble, hours after, I was in shock. Why? Because I couldn't find any of those buildings.
Rodriguez had one of only 5 master keys to unlock the doors in the middle stairwell and lead firefighters up floor by floor.
I went and picked up the man on the wheelchair and I started going down. The building started to oscillate so hard.
He saved several lives that day. Then suddenly Rodriguez heard a terrible rumbling like the sound of an earthquake.
I saw it was a total disaster, and all I hear is run, run, run.
Like so many others, Rodriguez ran from the cloud of debris and dove under a fire truck.
We went up by the stairs with the Port Authority police to start rescuing people. A lot of people were coming out, but there was a lot of people that stayed there. We brought a lot of people on wheelchairs and a lot of people on gurneys, all people that couldn't make it because there was no elevator service. The elevator went out.
The World Trade Center towers were built as a Class A building. That means that in the case of a fire, every third floor in both towers is closed to prevent a backdraft. It is the reason that Rodriguez's master key was so crucial to getting people out.
It was hard. The amount of heat that was generated because of the fire was coming down. The smoke, it was an acrid smoke because you could feel it on your throat.
He saw firefighters carrying 100 pounds worth of equipment on their backs, waiting for a freight elevator that would never come. That elevator was demolished, so Rodriguez led them up another way using a back pathway that only he knew. After the Sky Lobby collapsed, he finally listened to police who told him to get out. He was not prepared for what he was about to see.
When I look around, I find all the bodies of the people that jumped out of the building. They came out of the building and say, I saved myself. And a piece of debris came in and killed them.
William Rodriguez reacted heroically that day, causing him to be featured prominently in the news media for a short time, even later receiving an honorary award directly from President Bush after being invited to a dinner at the White House. However, his story did not end there. Although the corporate government-sponsored media organizations did their very best to ignore his most incendiary claims, clearly due to the fact that they inherently contradicted the official narrative. According to Rodriguez, that very morning at 8:46 a.m., just before the first plane hit, there was a loud explosion that came from beneath them at the sub-basement level, blowing them upwards. His story has never changed to this day. It would be one thing if we were solely relying on Rodriguez and his officially ignored testimony to the 9/11 Commission, but the fact of the matter is, in my attempt to corroborate his version of events, I found hundreds of police officers, firefighters, office and maintenance workers, all appearing to substantiate his claims of multiple explosions occurring throughout the morning before the timely collapse of the towers, as well as Building 7 later in the day.
That morning, I was supposed to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning every day. I called my supervisor because I was not going to work. I was going to take a sick day. Made it there at 8:30 in the morning. Go straight to the lobby, down to the basement. The building has 6 sub-levels of basement, B1, B2, all the way down to B6. Basement 6, basement 5, all the way up to basement 1 were all Port Authority areas. Some of them have parking for tenants, some of them have storage. B1 office, B1 level, is where they have the support office for my company, the cleaning company, American Building Maintenance. So I was talking to the supervisor, and at 8:46 we hear boom! An explosion so hard that pushed us upwards in the air, upwards. And it came out from below us, from the mechanical room that was right below us. And it was so loud and so powerful that all the walls cracked, the false ceiling fell on top of us, the sprinkler system got activated, and everybody started screaming so loud because they didn't know what was going on. And the first thing I'm going to say is that a generator just blew up on the B2 level, the level below me. And everybody's screaming. And when I'm going to verbalize it, 6 to 7 seconds after, we hear, "Bah!" The impact all the way on the top of the building of the plane. 2 different events separated by almost 7 seconds, separated by time. And now, I work in the building for 20 years. I know the difference of a sound coming from the top and one from the bottom. So when everybody started, what the heck is going on? A person comes running into the office saying, "Explosion, explosion." His hands extended, all the skin pulled from under his armpits, on both arms, hanging. And we thought it was clothing. It was part of his clothes. Until he gets closer, he was coming like this, like a zombie. Explosion, explosion. And when I looked at him, I realized it was his skin, like when you take off a glove and you let it hanging. And when I get to see his face, all this part was hanging of his face. And everybody started screaming in horror. And I say, "Don't move." The guy was a black guy named Felipe David. Worked for a company called Aramark.
William Rodriguez is a maintenance worker at the Trade Center, I believe. In any case, he's on the phone with us now. Mr. Rodriguez, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Tell me where you were when, well, which of the 2 buildings were you in?
I work on the building 1, the one that got hit the first time.
Tell me what happened.
I was on the basement, which is a support floor for the maintenance company, and we hear like a big rumble, not like an impact, like a rumble, like something like moving furniture on a massive way, and all of a sudden we hear another rumble, and a guy comes running into our office, and all his skin was off his body. All his skin, we went crazy. We started screaming. We told him to get out. We took everybody out of the office outside to the loading dock area, and then I went back in. And when I went back in, I saw people. I heard people that were stuck on an elevator, on a freight elevator, because all the elevators went down, and water was going in, and they were probably getting drowned. And we get a couple of pipes and opened the elevator, and we got the people out.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the planet probably?
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. We was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on our way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one, it was terrible. Then there was a third one, too, after that one.
Third explosion after that?
That's right.
And you were
everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, and then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And then exploded. The whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
And you were working there? Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Arthur Del Bianco is one of the lucky few, able to tell a tale of survival from a hospital bed.
All of a sudden, it was like bang, 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 like bullet shots, and then all of a sudden 3 tremendous explosions, and everything started coming down.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building. But then another plane hit the other building. But when I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, something, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down, and I got smoke and everything on me.
We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Of the 12,000 plus witnesses whose testimony was taken by the 9/11 Commission, which was finally set up almost exactly a year after the attacks, approximately 160 were conducted publicly. Rodriguez's testimony was conducted in private, and the evidence he presented was never specifically itemized in the commission report. He also complained that many of the survivors weren't even called to testify. The 9/11 Commission was established on November 27, 2002 by President George W. Bush, who initially appointed none other than Henry Kissinger to head the commission. A Slate article written and published the very same day, written by Christopher Hitchens, notes that the Bush administration has been saying in public for several months that it does not desire an independent inquiry into the gross failures of intelligence that left U.S. society defenseless 14 months ago. By announcing that Henry Kissinger will be chairing the inquiry that it did not want, the president has now made the same point in a different way. Later in the article, he points to Kissinger's consulting firm, Kissinger Associates, describing it as a privately held concern that does not publish a client list and that compels its clients to sign confidentiality agreements. Nonetheless, it has been established that Kissinger's business dealings with, say, the Chinese Communist leadership have closely matched his public pronouncements on such things as the massacre of Chinese students. Given the strong ties between himself, his partners Lawrence Eagleburger and Brent Scowcroft, and the oil oligarchies of the Gulf, it must be time for at least a full disclosure of his interests in the region. This thought does not seem to have occurred to the president, or to the other friends of Prince Bandar and Prince Bandar's wife, who helped in the evacuation of the bin Laden family from American soil without an interrogation in the week after September 11th. Within weeks, one of the family members of the 9/11 victims confronted former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who was unable to answer a simple question. "Mr. Kissinger, do you have any clients named bin Laden?" He resigned as the commission's chairman the very next day, after refusing to provide Congress with the names of his clients. By December 21st, 2002, less than a month after the Slate article was published, there was a leaked internal memo from Lawrence Eagleburger, senior associate at Kissinger Associates, that read, "Dear Henry, as per your request, I am providing you with a current client list for your information. I strongly urge you not to disclose this list, whatever the consequences to your objectives in the public sector to serve as Inspector General of the American intelligence apparatus, which, as you are aware, has consistently promoted our business interests around the world, and which remains, under various guises, one of our most lucrative clients. This client list presents a terrifying window into the covert structure of what's been called the deep state, or America's shadow government, listing high-profile clients such as the CIA, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the government of North Korea, the Carlyle Group, providing global cover for the CIA, and you guessed it, Osama bin Laden. In the wise words of Professor Emeritus Michael Chossudovsky, lest we forget, one day before the 9/11 attacks, as well as on the morning of 9/11, the father of the sitting President of the United States of America, George Herbert Walker Bush, was meeting with none other than Shafiq bin Laden, the brother of the alleged terror mastermind Osama bin Laden. This claim has been confirmed by multiple reports, one of which was published by The Economist in a June 2003 article stating that on the day Osama bin Laden's men attacked America, Shafiq bin Laden, described as an estranged brother of the terrorist, was at an investment conference along with two people who are close to President George Bush, his father, the first President Bush, and James Baker, the former Secretary of State who masterminded the legal campaign that secured Bush Jr.'s move to the White House. The conference was hosted by the Carlyle Group, a private equity firm that manages billions of dollars, including at the time some bin Laden family wealth. It also employs both Bush and Baker. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, when no one was being allowed in or out of the United States, many members of the bin Laden family in America were spirited home to Saudi Arabia. The revival of defense spending that followed greatly increased the value of the Carlyle Group's investments in defense companies. The Carlyle Group is embroiled with the defense and intelligence establishment. It is widely regarded as an extension of the U.S. government, or at least the National Security Agency, the CIA, and the Pentagon. The Washington Post also verified the story in an article published in March of 2003, claiming that fellow investors of the Carlyle Group, including Osama's brother Shafiq bin Laden and George W. Bush's dad, former President and CIA Director George H.W. Bush, met in the plush surroundings of New York's Ritz-Carlton Hotel on September 10th and 11th, 2001. Their business encounter, under the auspices of the Carlyle Group, was unfortunately interrupted on September 11th by the attacks on the World Trade Center. Now, before we conclude the episode, we should at least mention the allegations of insider trading, as well as the sophisticated war games and planned military exercises eerily similar to the actual event coincidentally scheduled for that very morning. Just before 9/11, an extraordinary amount of put options were placed on United Airlines and American Airlines stocks, triggering speculation that potential insiders may have possessed information, tipping them off to the impending attacks and placing their wagers accordingly. The Journal of Business, published by the University of Chicago Press, conducted a study analyzing the possibility of insider trading in the days leading up to September 11th and concluded that a measure of abnormal long put volume was examined and seen to be at abnormally high levels in the days leading up to the attacks. Consequently, the paper concludes that there is evidence of unusual option market activity in the days leading up to September 11th that is consistent with investors trading on advanced knowledge of the attacks. Journalist Chris Blackhurst wrote in an article published in The Independent, October 2001, that in the days leading up to 9/11, analysis shows a rise in the put-to-call ratio for United Airlines and American Airlines, the two airlines from which planes were hijacked on 9/11. Between September 6th and 7th, the Chicago Board Options Exchange recorded purchases of 4,744 put option contracts in United Airlines and 396 call options. On September 10th, more trading in Chicago saw the purchase of 4,516 put options in American Airlines, the other airline involved in the hijackings, with a mere 748 call options in American purchased that day. No other airline companies had an unusual put-to-call ratio in the days leading up to the attacks. The 9/11 Commission, on the other hand, would of course determine that all of these abnormal patterns in trading were purely coincidental. Bloomberg even reported that it wasn't only the affected airline companies that profited from the tragedy. Certain major insurance companies also saw anomalous trading activities. The article states that Citigroup, which estimated that its travelers insurance unit could pay $500 million in claims from the World Trade Center attack, had about 45 times the normal volume during 3 trading days before the attack for options that profit if the stock falls below $40. Citigroup shares fell in late trading to $38.09. Morgan Stanley, which occupied 22 floors at the World Trade Center, experienced bigger than normal pre-attack trading of options that profited when stock prices fell. Other companies, directly affected by the tragedy, had similar jumps. Even the major U.S. defense contractor Raytheon joined in on the fun, with an extraordinary high number of call options trading on September 10th. On September 11th, 2001, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, was involved in an ongoing operation deploying fighter aircraft to northeastern North America. The U.S. military and NORAD had also planned to conduct several military exercises, and a drill was being held by the National Reconnaissance Office, a Department of Defense agency. Operation Northern Vigilance was a NORAD operation which involved deploying fighter aircraft to locations in Alaska and northern Canada. The operation was a response to a Russian exercise in which long-range bombers were dispatched to Russia's high north. The operation was 1 part simulation, 1 part real world. It was immediately called off after NORAD received word from NEADS that the Federal Aviation Administration had evidence of a hijacking. There were at least 2 planned military exercises that day. One being an annual command-level exercise organized by United States Strategic Command in cooperation with Space Command and NORAD, called Global Guardian. The other exercise was called Vigilant Guardian, a semi-annual NORAD exercise that had been running in conjunction with Global Guardian for several days, involving all NORAD command levels, where out of a range of scenarios run on September 11th, one was a traditional simulated hijacking. Aside from military exercises, a National Reconnaissance Office drill was being conducted on September 11th, and in a simulated event, a small aircraft would crash into one of the towers of the agency's headquarters after experiencing a mechanical failure. The NRO is the branch of the Department of Defense in charge of spy satellites. All of this has spurred tremendous speculation, causing many to even consider the possibility that a group of government operatives and insiders used the cover of a military wargame exercise involving a hijacked airplane to remote control a civilian passenger jet into the World Trade Center. In the end, much is left unsaid, as is the nature of this subject. But I challenge each of you to reconsider and reflect on what you believe your government is truly capable of. It's time to roll back the state. We must reject this self-perpetuating system of unaccountable bureaucracy and this aggressive implementation of the Hegelian dialectic if we are to ever mount a defense against the manipulative techniques of problem, reaction, solution our controlling elites unquestionably impose on us. How many times can we fall into the trap before we recognize the pattern? The problem, created in order to elicit a certain public reaction. The people inevitably demand something be done about the problem, willingly accepting a pre-planned solution that always seems to involve more legal action or new government legislation that never would have passed under normal circumstances. Willful ignorance is defined as the deliberate avoidance of evidence that doesn't match a person's existing beliefs. And at a certain point, it quickly becomes the only plausible explanation for the unfortunate position we find ourselves in. And as we reemerge from this dark vein of powerful corruption, after bearing witness to the substantiated claims of high-level government officials with advanced knowledge of the attacks, government-sponsored investigations hindered from the outset to facilitate a cover-up, and glaring conflicts of interest exposed over time, it's become necessary, in honor of the victims and their families, to relaunch an independent and honest investigation into the real story behind what's widely considered the deadliest terrorist act in world history, September 11th, 2001.